Let me tell you what bothers me. What bothers me is that I really don't think that we in the Western world really cares about this war in Ukraine. What bothers me is that we seem to simply follow a narrative given to us by the mainstream media that is so obviously false and concocted and not based in the truth. And we just don't seem to question it. We just simply accept it. It's not different from the narrative that we were given by the mainstream media about the invasion of Iraq, the invasion of Libya, the chemical weapons of Assad, the disaster of Afghanistan. And yet, every single day, we seem to just nod our heads and go along with this narrative, while thousands and thousands of people are dying, while a country, Ukraine, and I cry in my heart for this country, is being destroyed. And I know, and you know, and we all know that it can be stopped tomorrow. This is exactly the question I asked more than a year ago to Scott Ritter when I spoke to him about this war. I sometimes wish that we can break through this whole censorship thing, and just for a month nonstop, we should allow ourselves to publish on social media and every single where in the entire world exactly what goes on in Ukraine. We should show the bodies, the faces of the dead. We should show the cluster bombs that are ripping off arms and legs. And we should ask ourselves, why are we not stopping this? Why are we not marching in the streets? Whatever has happened to the peace movement? If you're an American, why are you not writing to your congressman or congresswoman? We can stop this insanity. I really believe we can. This is my open letter to you, and an open letter to Joseph Biden. President Joseph Biden, the man from Scranton to Washington to the White House. It's also an open letter to Vladimir Putin and to Volodymyr Zelensky, to the architects of this war, to the NeoConservative movement in the United States of America, and to their hardcore followers in Europe and elsewhere in the world, to the military-industrial complex and the echo chambers of this war, to the so-called mainstream media, to those who beat the drums of war, and to those few who care to say, no, stop this. To the innocent victims of this war, and to the fallen soldiers, and in particular to the young men of Ukraine who are forced into a machine that they know will kill them and destroy even more lives of families, mothers and children. We've stopped counting the bodies of Russian or Ukrainian soldiers. I don't think we're capable of counting those bodies anymore. And who knows, really, in the fog of war, and in a time where nobody, not one single institution in the world, it will seem, is not somewhere guilty of some propaganda or fake news. But there's one thing one thing we sure know, and that is that this could have been, should have been avoided. That this war can be stopped tomorrow, today for that matter, and not by Putin or Zelensky, but by Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., the 46th and current president of the USA.
Ukraine has defied Russia's expectations at every single turn.
Not true. Not today, and not for at least the last year. And anybody who cares to inform themselves just a little bit beyond the attention-grabbing headlines of Western mainstream media will know that Joe Biden is either blatantly lying, misleading the American public, or ignorant of the facts. And these are not my observations. And because we are subjected to the words, the spin, the deception, call it what you want, of people we are supposed to trust, like Anthony Blinken, the NeoCons, Jake Sullivan, or the American Defense Minister Lloyd Austin, or the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, we're supposed to trust these people. And no journalists seem to be willing to question them or challenge them. So please help us out here, because they've been telling us the same story, the same lies over and over and over since the start of this war. I think it's time to turn to the voices of the dissidents. And if you think it's not worthy of a journalist, even an insignificant nobody from a small country like South Africa, where I come from, to express these opinions, or to feel a certain sense of urgency and anger, I will say that I'm compelled to do so by the simple fact that tens of thousands of men are dying and have died in this war. So if only for these men, and I see their images on Telegram, we have to challenge them. We have to challenge the voices that we hear every day. In my understanding, the vulgar, immoral rape of the truth. And we have to try to find the credible voices. I call them credible dissidents, journalists like Seymour Hersh or Alexander Mercouris from the Duran, Russian specialists like the ex-CIA analyst Ray McGovern, and military experts like Colonel Douglas McGregor, to try to find a semblance of the truth. And the truth is exactly the opposite of what you and I have been told. Here is my own rather clumsy question, which I put to Ray McGovern recently, about truth-telling and about whether Joe Biden actually knows that he's not telling the truth.
President Biden, how are we going? Absolutely. To what extent has Vladimir Putin been weakened by recent events? It's hard to tell, but he's clearly losing the war in Iraq. He's losing the war at home. And he has become a bit of a pariah around the world. And it's not just NATO. It's not just the European Union. It's Japan. It's 40 nations. President Biden, how are we going?
Do you think that President Joe Biden is well informed as to precisely what is going on in this war? And the reason why I'm asking you that is because I think he's the point man here. If he wants to end this war could stop tomorrow.
The answer to your question, Johan, is no. He doesn't know the full truth about this war. He's been advised by his military advisors and by his chief of the CIA, William Burns, that Russia has already lost. Now, they've already lost, and Burns has added, the weakness of the Russian military has been exposed for all to see. Now, I can't explain why that is so counterfactual. I can only assume that Bill Burns and Lloyd Austin, our Secretary of Defense, are telling the president what he wants to hear. The president himself seems to be a little bit, or maybe more than a little bit, delusional. Let me give you a concrete example. 3 weeks ago, up in Maine, up in the northeast of our country, he was on a campaign swing, making rhetorical flourishes in various speeches.
Yeah.
And then he met with a bunch of supporters in a home, in a small circle. And I always wonder what he really thinks when he talks to intimate friends or his advisors, what he really thinks.
Mhm.
And what he said was this: Madeleine Albright was correct. We are the indispensable, we are the exceptional country in the world. Who else could form the world but the President of the United States? Who else could do this? So that's what we're about. Now, the person who is there reporting this is a very distinguished history professor at a college. Now, she knows a lot about American history,
Mhm.
18th century. She commented, this shows that Joe Biden's vision for America comes right out of the position we occupied after World War II and persists to this day. Hello, Professor. It's over for indispensable, exceptional. And the fact that Biden still thinks, even in this small circle of friends, that it's up to the President of the United States, as he put it, to shape these events is delusional. And I'm afraid it's more than that. It's very dangerous, because when reality sets in and the Russians don't lose in Ukraine, but win, what is Biden going to do then in an election year? I'm frightened about that. And I'm sure Mr. Putin is just as frightened, if not more.
So what am I trying to tell you? What am I trying to scream out to the world, and why? For starters,
it's hard to look at what he's doing in Ukraine, what his forces are doing in Ukraine, and think that any ethical, moral individual could justify that. It's difficult to look at the
objectively, sincerely, does that not get to you? The fake moral outrage of the US State Department's John Kirby, or the blatant simplicity of the good guy versus evil narrative, the simple depiction of the enemy as the reincarnation of the devil and our guy in the shape of a comic book hero, the blatant and truly spectacular superficial nature of the disinformation war. Ray McGovern nails it on the head. The war in Ukraine is driven by the idea of American exceptionalism and the actuality of a changing world which threatens that order, American dominance, the fading American century. Which is why Ukrainian soldiers are dying today. It's a price worth paying. At least according to Senator Lindsey Graham, who not too long ago told exactly that to the Western world's new Winston Churchill, Ukraine's Zelensky. When Zelensky thanked the good senator for the $75 billion duly paid by the American taxpayer, this is exactly what Graham said. And the Russians are dying. The best money we've ever spent. This is how Jeffrey Sachs, one of the most esteemed economists in the world, a man who has not only been an advisor to the White House and the Pope, but also Gorbachev and Yeltsin themselves, this is how he defines the background and the root causes of this war. And this is not a theory. These are facts, and it has nothing to do with Mad Vlad and imperial ambitions.
Well, I've written that this is just the latest neoconservative debacle of the U.S. neoconservatives. The neoconservatives are the group that took over U.S. foreign policy 30 years ago at the end of the Soviet Union. This neoconservative group said, oh, okay, our rival is gone. We now are the sole superpower. We run the world. We are the hegemon, to use the term that the international relations types use.
Yep.
Or as the military in the U.S. says, we have full spectrum dominance. Now, the idea was 30 years ago already, we can basically do what we want. And they have tried in Iraq. They have tried in Syria. They have tried in Libya. They have tried in Afghanistan. And what they've tried to do is to say the U.S. runs the show. It fails all the time. When it comes to this war in Ukraine, this has been brewing for 3 decades as well, because the terms of Gorbachev ending the Soviet Warsaw Pact military alliance was that NATO would not take advantage of that, but would also stay where it was. The phrase that was used to Gorbachev was, NATO will not move 1 inch to the east. Of course, as soon as the Soviet Union ended, the United States neocon said, we can do what we want. We don't have to honor any agreement. And they started NATO enlargement. First to Central Europe, probably acceptable and understandable, though a lie. I wouldn't have done it. But to Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, these were countries that had been dominated by the Soviet Union. They're not close to Russia. They weren't any direct threat to Russia to have them as part of NATO. But then, starting in the 2000s with George W. Bush Jr., who really was the neocon administration par excellence, with Cheney as his vice president, the one who made the Iraq War, for example, they enlarged NATO to 7 more countries: Romania, Bulgaria, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Slovakia, and Slovenia. Now, that's coming pretty close to Russia, and Russia kept saying, don't do this. It's provocative. You told us you never would. You're getting to our borders. You're threatening our security. And then in 2008, George Bush actually did the horror, though privately, of the Europeans, said, we're going to expand NATO to Ukraine and to Georgia. Now, if you look at a map, and I hope your listeners do look at a map, if the NATO alliance expanded to Georgia and Ukraine, the idea was and would be to encircle Russia in the Black Sea, because you'd have NATO in Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, and Georgia. You'd actually encircle the Russian naval fleet, and as U.S. neocon strategists said, that would end Russia as any kind of even regional power. It couldn't project any kind of power, even naval, in the Eastern Mediterranean. That was the idea.
It was a privilege and an honor to hear President Zelensky speak to a joint session of Congress. He's resolved and determined to make sure his country stays free, no matter what the price. Almost a year ago, Putin invaded Ukraine without provocation. He's one of the biggest war criminals in the world, Putin. He's committing war crimes every day on your television. And for us to turn our back and forgive and forget will destroy law as we know it. To allow Putin to be successful in Ukraine will entice others like China to take Taiwan, and the world will quickly unravel. This is a defining moment for world order, for the rule of law, where the rule of gun trumps the rule of law. I will stick with President Zelensky and the brave Ukrainian people as long as it takes. No Americans are dying. They need our economic and military help. They need weapons, and the weapons we're giving them, they're using to full effect. So to the American people, their fight is your fight.
Their fight is your fight. Lindsey Graham, the senator who thinks that your money, the American taxpayers' money, is well spent on dead Russians. Take note, though they've never bothered to consult with you. The figures remain classified, but US officials quoted by the New York Times recently put the number of dead at 70,000 in Ukraine and as many as 120,000 injured. It's a staggering figure from an armed forces estimated at only 500,000 strong. The United Nations has recorded 9,177 civilian deaths to date. Independent observers say, though, that these statistics are nonsense. or at the very least at the lowest end of the scale. An estimated 5.1 million people have been driven from their homes and are internally displaced, and more than 6.2 million people have crossed into neighboring countries. The World Bank predicts the war will cause Ukraine's economy to shrink by 45% this year. Once again, independents are saying nonsense. The country has already been destroyed and it will cost billions and billions and billions of dollars to rebuild it. Weigh that up against the simple fact that peace can be, should be, or should have been reached through negotiations, and that the key to those negotiations are plain and simple. Not to be lost in military gains or jargon or strategic positions, in the linguistics of power, but in respect and understanding of the other, inclusive of their fears and hopes and aspirations, in our common humanity. Perhaps in Ubuntu, the African philosophy that says I am because you are. A philosophy that talks about our interconnectivity and interdependence. Peace can be achieved tomorrow if we can achieve the grace of humility. It's time to send my open letter to Joe Biden, to Putin, and to Zelensky. And since Joe Biden was the senator who once, some 30 years ago, scolded the weapons inspector Scott Ritter, who then exposed the lies and deception of Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction, and is right now exposing the lies of this war once again, perhaps it's a good time for us to lend our ears to Scott Ritter again.
Once again, is there überhaupt at all any chance whatsoever that the Ukrainians can, in some way or another form, win this war as the media seems to insist they must? Any chance?
Russia will not lose this conflict. The question now is, how do you define victory? Because it's no longer, this war will end on Russia's terms. There will be no negotiated settlement. Ukraine doesn't have any cards to play. The poker game's over. It closed on April 1st in Istanbul, when Ukraine could have got a deal. Ukraine withdrew under pressure from the West. It was Boris Johnson that came in and said, no deal.
Yeah.
And now the Russians have sacrificed a lot and they've mobilized, and this will end on Russia's terms. The only negotiation will resemble that which took place in Tokyo Bay in September 1945, when the Japanese had to stand before a table with the American conquerors and sign the terms dictated by the United States. Russia will dictate terms. So it's up to Russia what Russia wants out of this. I can't sit here and say with full confidence what I know. What Russia says it wants. It wants demilitarization. That means that all NATO influence is eliminated from the Ukrainian military. Since the Ukrainian military is a de facto proxy of NATO today, it means the total destruction of the Ukrainian military.
Yeah.
So either Russia is going to kill them all, and Russia is prepared to do so now. There's no more soft glove approach. The Russians are in the business of killing Ukrainians, and business is good. So beware the West, because soon the only hope you have is Russian goodwill, because your economy is going down. It's collapsing, not because of anything Russia did, because of what you did, what we did in seeking to isolate Russia, sanction Russia. It has failed. Russia has emerged with a very solid economy while Europe is suffering. Russia isn't in the business of saving Ukraine anymore. Russia's in the business of destroying Ukraine and in the process bringing harm to Europe. Russia will, I believe, generate an economic emergency, humanitarian emergency in Ukraine that requires millions of people to flee for their lives. If they stay in their frozen cities, they will die. There will be no food, no water, no electricity, no healthcare, nothing. This is a tragedy, but the West brought it on themselves. Russia will denazify Ukraine, and the cost of that denazification will be horrific. The gloves are off. Russia's not committing war crimes. Everybody's going, this is a war crime. Really? Take a look at what the United States did to Iraq in 1991. I was a part of that. We took out their infrastructure. We took out their electric. We took out their water. We took out it because it's all dual use. Look what we did to Serbia. We shut the lights out in Serbia in 1999. NATO did. Russia's just doing it better. They're doing it bigger. And it should scare the hell out of the West. Yeah. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that word on radio, so I apologize. But it should scare the heck out of Europe, because I think Europe needs to wake up that they're, for the grace of God, go us. Meaning, you want to fight with Russia. This is what war is about, ladies and gentlemen. Europe forgot that. Europe forgot what it's like to have cities torn apart, populations dislocated, death and suffering on a large scale, economies malfunctioning. Welcome to war, Europe. You wanted it, you got it, you pay the price, and ain't no Russian shedding a tear for you. They were pushed and they had no choice.
Which brings me to this question. It would appear to me, and I'd like your view on this, that the United States and their allies have kind of dug themselves into a corner here. How would the media spin all of that when we have to face reality, when we have to face the fact that it is not going the way as is portrayed by the media today?
The media doesn't exist as legitimate journalism anymore. They're purely a propaganda arm of their respective, national security establishments. So again, the Russians are getting stronger, and the Ukrainians and NATO are getting weaker. And anybody who thinks that this doesn't end in a decisive Russian victory, again, I'd like to know what you're smoking or drinking, because I want some of that, man.
Yeah. Dear Mr. Biden, dear Mr. President, it's been 580 days since the Russians invaded Ukrainian territory. Most reasonable people condemned the invasion, as I know you do. But thanks, Mr. President, and I know that you are old enough and wise enough to know that are not always that simple, not always that black and white. Newton's third law states that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. It's time to break through these cycles, because ordinary people, ordinary citizens of the world, suffer deeply as a consequence of these actions. Thank you for watching this. I started this out by saying that, by asking the question, where are the peace marches? Why are we not doing something? So this is my call. Well, perhaps some of you will react to this. If you've watched to this point, you may as well give it a go. Take your mobile telephone and make a little clip of yourself, a little film of yourself, and make a statement for peace. Make a call of some sort. And send me that little video that you make. A call for peace. And you send it to Talk to Ubuntu. I'm reading it here from my screen. Talk, the number 2, Ubuntu. Like the African philosophy, Ubuntu. I am because you are. That's the philosophy. So make a little film. Say something. Make a call for peace. And send me that little film, and I will try to put it in a nice little program which we put out here on YouTube. And perhaps it might make us feel a little bit better about ourselves, and maybe we can contribute a little bit towards peace. Remember, talk to Ubuntu at gmail.com. I'll put the address right at the bottom of the screen. Thank you very much for watching. Till next time.